Welcome back to this last cherry on the top session of this conference, the panel discussion with 5 experts from academia to politics to practice, so we have really everything here, which means for you, please take this opportunity to ask a lot of questions, because that's not every day that we have practitioners, professor and member of the parliament seated in one row, so that's a privilege. I welcome from this side on my esteemed colleague, Jan Bieser. He's a professor at the BFH for Sustainability and Digitalization. Then, Florin, is there a thing with your mic?
I don't think it's... Oh, it's working. Okay.
It's working. Cool. It's working. So, Florin, Director of Open Data. Then we have here Céline. You're the founder of Resilio. Andrew Melk. Yeah. The only panelist with a background in literature. From literature to IT, can be short way. And last but not least, Gerhard André. He's a Nationalrat, member of the parliament of the Swiss parliament. So I have asked all of these panelists to prepare a brief statement, brief like 30 seconds to 1 minute, on the question of all questions, in German, the Gretchenfrage. How sustainable is digitalization really? Let's start here, Jan.
Okay, it seems like it's working. Perfect. Thank you, Rika, for the nice introduction. And yeah, when I thought about the statement, I thought, well, 20 years ago, if we think digitalization started roughly 20 years ago or so, it came with a big hope, which was dematerialization. So it basically meant that since we now can so easily share information, we require less physical resources. And why, for example, we can stream music and videos and do not have to produce CDs and DVDs and so on. We do not have to print books anymore, we can read online. Or we do not have to travel anymore because we can do video conferences, audio conferences, and so on. Now, 20 years later, with quite some advancement in digitalization, we've seen our resource consumption, it did not decrease, actually. So the hope did not become true. And this is because digitalization is quite resource intensive as well. And digitalization supports many resource intensive activities. For example, because we have e-commerce, Amazon, and so on, we can so easily shop worldwide. With Netflix, we can stream 24/7, and many other applications, like with Uber, we can more easily drive cars around, and so on. So we have many examples how digitalization supports actually very resource-intensive activities. And if we want to make it sustainable, I think we need to make digitalization less resource-intensive, and also think about what we actually want to use it for and where it might do more harm than good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was more than 1 minute. It's okay. You're a professor. That's your job. But Florin, please.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief because I think it also connects very well to what Jan just said. I recently heard the sentence, "We cannot chatbot our way out of climate change," and I think that's kind of the core of the problem. So digital transformation, digitalization, digital technologies are just tools, right? But if we look at it now, it's definitely more, and like Jan said, it's definitely more part of the problem than part of the solution. Technology is getting more and more efficient, but the overall consumption is still growing. So the question is really, how can we reduce the overall consumption, energy consumption, resources, emissions, etc. of technology? And that's really, the answer to that question is really a mindful use. And I'm going to elaborate on that maybe in a minute. But I think it's really important at this point to distinguish between hype, hope, and fact and evidence on the other hand. And the solution, I think it's a couple of tools, but I think definitely one of them is regulation. There's definitely things you and I can do, but there has to be a broader framework, and big tech has to be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Céline, please.
Yes, at Resilio, we support organizations and companies in their green IT approach. And often we are here because the company wants to be more sustainable. And we have this approach, sometimes, okay, we'll be sustainable with, we will stop print any paper, so we'll have a zero print policy. But at the end, it's just that you can't see the impact of, for example, sending the invoice to a customer by email instead of printing it. And now we have the tool to compare two processes, the processes with the printing and the process with the digital and the email. And that was not the case maybe years ago, but now we know that we have to consider the whole life cycle of a process, starting from building the equipment. You mentioned the resources that we will soon miss in terms of minerals, metals, etc., and compare it to paper. And sometimes the answer is yes, it's better to print. So we are here to give some figures, and sometimes we can see that digitalization is great. It can be a good idea. We have some projects that are interesting, but we have really to measure and to compare, and sometimes it's a bad idea, and we have to keep it simple and not putting digital everywhere in every process. And you mentioned the fact to be more conscious and not a hype effect, and it's exactly the same in the company that we are supporting.
Thank you very much. Please, Andrew.
Thanks. So I think when we think about whether digitalization can be sustainable, the classic answer would be it depends. And of course it depends on a lot of different factors. And I think we've had some great outlines of how actually making things measurable and making people conscious of the way that they use digitalization can make a difference. I work for Platform SH. We help people to run their application lifecycle through to hosting of projects. And so being able to measure that and being able to give customers information about what their carbon footprint is one of the important things for us. The other thing that I'd like to bring to this conversation is basically the idea of positive incentives that can also be brought into the discussion, especially in terms of how what we're calling here maybe green IT or greener IT, but also what we like to call green ops. So that's the way that you actually manage a whole life cycle using a green perspective. How that can be aligned with what we also call FinOps. So that's basically taking a financial perspective on the way that businesses run their digital infrastructure. And the really exciting or interesting part for me is that, in fact, FinOps can be an ally in terms of getting things greener.
Thank you very much. Gerhard Ande.
Thank you so much for having me. So to put my political hat on, because that's a thing I'm working on quite a lot, I think digital has to now be not being protected like a puppy anymore. The Welpenschutz has to be over. I mean, digital was basically able to do anything it wanted over decades now. I mean, we have sectors like mobility, construction, all over the place. We look at it and we try to figure out politically how to deal with energy consumption and resource consumption. Digital, it appears, it's allowed to do anything because it's just positive. And I think we really have to stop that and put it on the map like each and every other thing we're dealing with right now. Because it can't be that we try to do this energy and resource transition, and in parallel, there's just some different universe now with AI, and they're completely different rules. I mean, that doesn't work. It can't work. That's why I'm trying to put the ecological footprint of digitization on the political map, because it's not.
Thank you so much for all of your statements. A very interesting statement. Prepare your questions, you will have time, but I take the privilege as the moderation to ask the first question, if I may. Because it's not every day, as I said, that we have a member of the parliament here. Gerhard Ande, you said we need to put this on the political map. You're a member of the Green Party, but you're also the founder of a digital agency. So how does this come together? How do you, as a member of the Green Party, put this on the political map? What does politics have to do?
I mean, it's a lot about literacy, about getting to know what's happening in this sector, how the solutions work, what consumes energy. I mean, I often have like brief exchanges with my colleagues in Parliament. They ask me questions. Gerhard, how is that with that AI thing? How is that calculated? And I try to literally explain how it works. And it's interesting because you have to better understand also as Parliament how things work. And then you can start a discussion. So, okay, now the next thing we're buying from yet another big American company, what's in there? And do we actually need all that stuff? We have to talk about simplicity. We have to talk about sobriety. Very often we get stuff that does stuff we don't need, and it costs a fortune. It uses energy like hell, and it just makes you extremely dependent of some agenda of a big corp, usually. And these things, it's basic, and you can explain that. And very often it helps how Office Word evolved. I still, on a daily basis, see Word documents where a title isn't a title, but it's Arial 16 bold. So that's a basic feature in a document, so structuring content. That's the most fundamental feature within Office Word. But not even this feature is understood and used. But with each and every edition of this software, we get new stuff. So do we actually need that? We didn't even get the most fundamental features of this software. So keep it simple, keep it smaller, keep it, because very often it just does too much, and we get too many features, and it's just extremely complex. So I'm advocating for simplicity, for basic stuff, and just cut the crap, basically, because it's just a way to get you more. I mean, what other economy you call your clients like drug dealing users? I mean, they're the same patterns, you see. And I think I'm a bit like blunt now, but I think it's important to show also the mechanics. And very often it's sold as the new, most innovative thing you absolutely have to have, but you still didn't get your PDF problem. You should solve like for decades already.
Okay, keep it simple, cut the crap. We got it. So I am a lawyer. I was hoping we'd be talking about regulation, but okay, keep it simple. I think that's even better.
You need less regulation if things are simple.
Even cut the regulation, okay. Florin, and then I will give you the floor, I promise. You, in open data, you also think about regulation, right? Do you agree? Do we just have to keep it simple, or do we have to, what's the first step?
Yeah, I think Gerhard's example is very good in that sense. If you look at for example, the Microsoft suite. So at this point, like you mentioned, like it's kind of overblown with features. So something that happened very recently is that Microsoft pushes like Copilot onto the consumers because not enough people would use it just themselves, right? They don't buy the add-on because it's too expensive. So now they just push it onto the package. Package gets more expensive. You as a user, you don't really have a say because there's structural problems, right? There's big tech monopolies. A very smart person coined the term "too big to care." So all of those big tech monopolies, they're just too big to care, right? They don't really give a damn about the user anymore because they just have their monopoly. They feel very comfortable there, and I think that's where we have to. Kind of leverage. So I think yes, there's some responsibility with the consumer, but the consumer, they don't have all the information, right? So transparency, accountability, I think those are very important measures here to even give people the option, right? And at this point, they don't really have it. There's also, in a lot of senses, like in a lot of domains, there's not really alternatives, right? I mean, there's maybe alternatives for some of us here, right, that are like savvy in the tech field and in the open source field, but for most end users, they're not really alternatives, right? So I think that's really where we have to kind of go at this problem also at a political, but also as a structural and systemic way. Yeah.
And if I may, maybe also on you mentioned regulation, and you mentioned that people, they don't have the choice, they don't know. So that's why there is a big role for me about training and raising awareness in the companies, but also in schools, for example. Yes, because they have no clue that the way, for example, the younger generation, I facilitate some workshop in schools, and the younger generation, they don't have a clue how is it built, the equipment. The smartphone is like a magical tool, really. It's like internet, and they don't know that. Sometimes I have the question, what is a data center? What is that? How does it work? So I think there is a big role also to raise awareness. And so, of course, it can be something that's the political will do it mandatory in schools, for example. So that's why I think it's complementary to talk about regulation and raising awareness.
So do you go to schools, or do you know institutions that do go to schools?
Yes.
Okay.
In some schools, yes, we facilitate or we train the teachers about what are the impacts, the environmental footprints of digital and IT.
So maybe you also can go to Parliament building.
Of course, with pleasure.
To help.
Okay, yes.
For it.
Jan, you wanted to add something?
I think it's really great what you're doing, and I know you want us to fight a little bit on stage, but I'm saying another thing to confirm what you just said. Because, I mean, when I'm sometimes thinking about this, when I grew up, I learned some things about saving energy. For example, when you heat, you don't open the window the whole day, just for 2 minutes, Stoßlüften, and then you close it again. Or when you boil some water, you put the lid on. And with digital technology, digital consumption, we don't have this knowledge yet. That's why I think education in schools or by parents and so on is very, very, very important. At the same time, I'm not so much always pro-regulation, but when I see that self-regulation will probably not work, then I think we might need regulation. And I think we might need it there as well, because, I mean, this world, how it's designed, it tells people, use me, use me, use me, use me, use me all the time. And you can tell people as much as you want, like, be conscious, don't use it too much. If you're in a world which tells you round the clock and your idols and everybody is there, use me, use me, use me, and the whole business model of the companies is based on use me, use me, use me, because it's advertisement-based, then I don't see a lot of hope into self-regulation. Then I also am more pro, okay, we have to do something, especially as we know it has social and environmental negative consequences. Yeah.
Maybe, Andrew, what's your perspective? You own a business. You want people to use your services, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly regulation is important in terms of also raising awareness with people about how they need to think about how their business is run, how they work, and that kind of thing. But with our company, I think we are very much interested in the topic of green IT, and we care about that. So in fact, we have certain things that we do in terms of the way that we work. So for example, when you want to choose a region for where you're going to put your project, we have a little leaf, a little green leaf that shows you, okay, well, why don't you put it in Sweden rather than in Germany, for example, because obviously a Swedish data center is just much lower in terms of the carbon footprint. Or, for example, people using our new service, which we call Upsun, you actually get a 3% discount on using the service if you put it into a low carbon region in that kind of way. So actually nudging people in that way can help as well, I think. And actually, so I think making digitalization more conscious in that way. I've got one more example, and this is something that I often get this, where a customer will write to me and say, hey, you switched off my development environment. What happened there? And we'd say, well, what happens is if you don't use a development environment for 30 days, we switch it off until you use it again. Because why do you want to have something running that no one is using and no one is looking at? And they say, you're going to charge us for that? And say, well, if you don't want to use it, then switch it off and actually just get rid of the environment. But otherwise, you know, like, you're basically, you know, like, we're not going to keep something running if you're not using it. And so people can then just redeploy and then the environment runs again. But if they're not using it, it gets switched off. And it's actually, once they understand that, they go, oh, right, that makes sense actually, doesn't it? You know, so.
I see. Conscious digitalization. Now it's your turn. Who has an input? Who disagrees? Who agrees? Who wants to ask questions? Yes, please. Do we have a microphone? Do I give a microphone?
You're not getting mine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting panel so far. I think a couple of important aspects were already spoken about. But so, I mean, what we're talking about is inefficient digital growth, right? We're growing and growing, and more products, more services, larger companies, more AI companies. And I'm wondering, what are the main drivers or forces behind the inefficient growth, right? It could be, probably is, a big part of it, basically consumerism and hype-driven and VC money that's interested in finally generating some returns on all of the free products that they gave us in the last 15 years. But another thing is probably also strategic competition and the fear that we might be missing out. So, in a geopolitical sense, right? We want to be on top of things and state of the art, and that's why we're investing in AI and quantum computing and I don't know what. So I'm wondering, like, the balance of those two things, and like, what is the main force that we have to develop counter narratives for that would maybe have an impact on a political level.
Once. Maybe I can say something about from my perspective. I mean, the issue is decades old. It's the problem of the tragedy of the commons. It's decades old. So externalities aren't priced in. And now we have that effect on steroids. It's the same problem since decades. We know that if you don't integrate external effects, costs you generate on people, on the planet, on the long run, you basically subsidize a product by us taxpayers, by next generations. It's nature that's paying the price. I mean, it's always the same issue. We try for decades to fix that, and it's just a political nightmare because this capitalistic driver is so strong, and it's so hard to improve that fact. On the other hand, things are happening. I mean, if you look at the EU regulation, you can hate it or not, but at least they try to make it more integral. Integral, does that exist? So to actually have a broader view of what is your activity doing. Not just as the next nice thing you can sell for a few dimes. No, that's not the question, but what's the effect on it? So the solution right now, the political solution, but also the economic solution, is starting to have a second accounting system about impact on the people, on the planet. And sooner or later, I hope these things are going to be put together, and you're going to have the price that represents not just financial price, but the whole bunch of it. I think that's the long-term solution. But right now, in every sector, we have the exact same problem. Externalities are not included in pricing. And right now in AI, I mean, it's insane how much money goes in that sector. It explodes. No rules count because it's digital. It's allowed to do anything. It's allowed to put back on all nuclear production facilities, just to run these AI systems to probably sooner or later produce artificially generated cat videos, I suppose. 90% of the cases. And that's an issue. We have to talk about impact. We can't ignore that anymore, but that's tectonic. It's huge. But we have to see that on a broader perspective.
Can I ask Céline and Jan, do you think, maybe very brief, but still, can we put a price tag on it? are we able to measure the externalities?
If we want, we can, yes, of course. Yes, for example, now we have this carbon economic with the carbon credit, but what I wanted to say that we can spend hours to answer your question, really. There is one thing that is called the rebound effect, that each time we try to optimize something, then we have much more bandwidth or something of, that is available, so we'll accelerate our usage. And so, of course, we don't have today really the political will to stop, because all of this is seen as progress and innovation, and that's really something we have to define differently, to be innovative but in a frugal way, using low-tech, for example. And at the end, my belief is that we will be obliged, because the resources, they will not last forever. We are in a finite environment. And when we estimate that we have still 20 to 30 years of resources in some metal that we need to build our equipment. For example, copper, antimony, this kind of, we will stop having it, and we don't know really how to recycle. So we will be obliged to stop, and so, but of course we will have to anticipate if we don't want to have a really trouble, because in the same time we are building all our society, and yes, all our systems are on digital, and at the end we will not be able to maintain it. Sorry, I was very long.
Yeah, I would first agree that we're able to put a price on it. If it's the correct one, I don't know, but we are able to put a price on it, probably. And then, coming back to your question, I think, well, digitalization is a broad field, and it's difficult to only talk about this one digitalization, because there's so many different forms. If, like, digitalization is just a tool which is used for other goals, then we have to regulate the other goals and not the digitalization. So if you're a company selling cars, then you use digital tools to sell more cars, but there the digitalization is not the problem, the selling the cars is the main, that has to change somehow, and then the company will maybe use digitalization for other goals. But then there's an area where digitalization is the goal itself, and this is when we talk about social media, when we talk about often ChatGPT, when we talk about search engines and so on. The end product is digitalization. And I think over time we slipped into a world where also for us consumers we expect everything is for free. And since everything is for free, I mean, they make money in a different way, which is with our time, with our data, with advertisement. And that led to the whole system being built or based on a business model which is let's grow digital consumption as much as possible. All the companies which work, let's say not all, but many companies which work in the internet, their ultimate goal is that we spend as much time as possible on their platforms, because this is how the business models work, because everything is for free and flat rate based and so on. I hope we would get, I mean, one solution would be to get away from these flat rate based models and so on. I'm not sure if that is realistic. But then we also need, what I want to say is we also need to think about the business models which drive, I think, which set the incentives for this unlimited growth. And it could be designed in a different way. But of course, it's difficult to think about how can we change that now. For sure not quickly, but maybe in the long term. Yeah.
There's no free social lunch, okay? You take that away. Please, we're here for your questions. We have a question here. Oh, that's not me. Matthias.
So all these regulating ideas sound good, but from my point of view, it's a little bit unrealistic in today's world. Nevertheless, I think there's in the European Union, there's this Right to Repair Act, which I think shows quite some progress in this area. Maybe can somebody of you summarize the key points and also comment on what do you think, is it effective or not, or is it the right direction to go?
I think Florin,
I could just, I mean, you could also briefly touch on that topic, because I also didn't know this, but this is actually something that's going to be implemented in Switzerland as well. From the 1st of January, we're going to have a right to repair, which means basically, especially in the hardware context, that you have on the one hand, you have labels that kind of say, the degree of repairability, and on the other hand, you are allowed as a consumer to be able to buy, as that's backup, spare parts for pieces. It's still a Kann-Formulierung in Switzerland, so the Federal Council can do this, but I think it's a great step forward. I think, definitely. I don't know about, maybe you can tell more about how that's been implemented on a EU level and on how successful it has been so far, but I think it's definitely one of the right alleys, I would say. I don't know. Otherwise, I can also elaborate on something else. Because what you said about regulation, I think what's very important when we talk about the role of government, I think regulation is one thing, but I think there's many different roles or many other action points government can take. So I think one important point, and I think we've heard a lot about, is procurement. So I think the government is also a role model in that sense, so they should buy sustainable products, right? And also when it comes to digitalization. And the other thing is investments in infrastructure. So infrastructure in the software context, but also data. So that's always going to be more sustainable than if everybody does it themselves, right? So also thinking about that. I think that's also other leverage we have there.
Yeah, my panelists know how to make me happy. I told them. He spoiled the secret to fight. They don't fight, but at least they talk about procurement. So I'm a bit shocked because...
I'll hand over to you.
No, let's not go there. But still, I'm shocked because we have already reached time. I still want to give you, because you don't see what's coming, we see it. So I will give you the opinion for one last question, if there is one.
Maybe while we're looking for a question, maybe I say something.
The professor, yes, please, Jan.
No, because you said it seems unrealistic, and I think it seems unrealistic until somebody does it. 10 years ago, would you have thought that somebody would have said we ban fuel-driven cars by 2040 or something? Or 2 years ago, would you have thought that we ban short-distance flights in France? And Australia just now announced that they will ban social media for children under 16, which seemed unrealistic 4 months ago, but now they start doing it and so on. So it also sometimes needs bold people and so on. And I'm again saying not everything should be regulated and so on, definitely. But when we see it's like a lose-lose situation and we don't see a self-regulation hope will happen, maybe then it's time to be bold and do that.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing on that. We also talked about frugality and how, in fact, using resources wisely sometimes sounds like the opposite of what maybe a Microsoft or a ChatGPT is all about. But the more you look at actually the newest feedback from Goldman Sachs and incredibly conservative institutions like that, they're saying, in fact, there's no money to be made out of this right now. So, in fact, when people start thinking more carefully about that and looking at the frugality argument, they're going to say, well, why are we putting this money into this stuff? Why are we doing that? Why are we, spending more than we need to? And actually being more aware on that side and doing this financial calculation can also be a green calculation. So I think, you can bring those things together as well. So regulation is great, but people thinking smart can also be great.
People thinking smart, I think and still one question, okay. Keep it brief, please.
Over the last 30 years, we have seen many things that have been able to, or has improved our lives due to digitalization. But one of the things that we have also come by is that the cycle where we have a stable environment gets shorter and shorter. If you have bought a typewriter 30 years ago, you've maybe used it 10 years. Now, if you buy your smartphone today, that goes in the direction of the repair, right to repair, but also the pressure that digitalization pushes upon consumers is high to renew every year, every half year, every 3 months. Your app is not working anymore, you have to upgrade. So what do you think how can we come back to a more stable environment where we don't have to continue this cycle of, or to always have shorter cycles that we are pressured to follow?
The one person can answer who has the shortest answer.
Challenge.
Challenge accepted. I would say that the trend now, since 2 or 3 years, it's quite a bit different because, for example, for smartphone, last year we had, for the first time, people are keeping their smartphone longer. So now it's like 3 years instead of 2 years, 2 or 3 years ago. And as well because it's now very expensive, and the way it will, again, the resource will miss, so it will be more and more expensive. So we will have, I think I'm an optimistic person, but the things are changing, and for me, in a good way.
Things are changing in a good way. Room for optimism. A warm applause for all the panelists up here.